The warning lights flashed red across the bridge of the Aurora Dawn as Captain Jake Morrison read the incoming message for the third time. The alien text had been translated by their computers, but the meaning still seemed impossible to believe. An entire species was asking for help because they were being hunted to extinction by a single creature, Dr. Lisa. Grant looked up from her science station where she had been studying the biological data that came with the message. Her face was pale as she turned to face the captain. Jake, according to these readings, this thing is 12 feet tall and can walk through solid walls. The Zilani have been fighting it for over 200 years, and they have never even wounded it. Commander Rick Stone crossed his arms and shook his head. Sounds like another tall tale to me. Every species we meet claims they have some unstoppable monster on their world. Remember the Korthak and their death worms that turned out to be oversized earthworms? Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez spoke up from her communication station. Sir, I have been monitoring Zilani broadcasts for the past 6 hours. Their news feeds show real footage of destroyed cities and mass graves. Whatever this thing is, it has killed millions of their people. Captain Morrison walked to the main screen where the star map showed their current position. They were 3 days away from Zalara Prime, the homeworld of the Zilani. The peaceful, herbivorous aliens had been in contact with humans for only 2 years, but they had always been friendly and helpful. Now they were begging for help against something they called the Void Stalker. Dr. Grant, what else can you tell me about this creature? Morrison asked. Lisa pulled up the data on the main screen. The Zilani records go back 500 years. The creature first appeared in their northern continent and has been slowly spreading south ever since. It hunts alone, never in groups. It can phase through solid matter, making their weapons useless. Its claws can cut through their strongest metals, and its saliva is highly acidic. How does it hunt? Stone asked, his military training making him focus on tactical details. According to the reports, it seems to enjoy the fear. It will stalk a settlement for days, picking off individuals one by one. The Zilani describe it as playing with its food. It has some kind of intelligence, maybe even sapience. Morrison nodded. Slowly, and they want us to help them fight this thing? Rodriguez turned from her station. Sir, I just received another message. High Counselor Vexhai is requesting permission to come aboard. He says he needs to speak with us face to face about the situation. Grant him permission. Have him dock in Bay 2 in 1 hour. The next hour passed quickly as the crew prepared for their first meeting with the Zilani leader. The Aurora Dawn had a crew of 43 humans, but only the senior staff would meet with the alien diplomat. Morrison had served in the colonial navy for 15 years and had dealt with many alien species, but he had never seen one as desperate as the message suggested. High Counselor Vexhai arrived exactly on time. The Zilani were tall, thin beings, with pale blue skin and large eyes that seemed to hold great sadness. Vexhai wore simple robes that marked his high position in their society. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too much death. Captain Morrison, thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I know this request must seem strange to your people. Morrison gestured for the alien to sit at the conference table. Tell us about this creature, Counselor. Our files show it has been hunting your people for centuries. Vexhai's large eyes filled with what humans would recognize as tears. The Void Stalker is not just a predator, Captain. It is death itself given form. Our ancestors built great cities with walls 50 feet high, but it walks through them like air. We created weapons that can destroy mountains, but they cannot even scratch its hide. Every species has apex predators, Dr. Grant said gently. What makes this one so different? It learns, Vexhai replied, his voice shaking. Every trap we set, every weapon we build, every strategy we try, it remembers and adapts. Our military leaders estimate that at its current rate of hunting, the Zilani will be extinct within 50 years. Commander Stone leaned forward. How many of these creatures are there? Only one. There has only ever been one. It does not age, it does not reproduce, it simply hunts and kills. Some of our scientists believe it may be immortal. The room fell, silent as the humans absorbed this information. A single creature had brought an entire civilization to the brink of extinction. Morrison had fought in 3 wars and commanded ships in dangerous situations, but this was something entirely different. "Counselor, what exactly do you want from us?" Morrison asked. Vexhai looked directly at the captain. "We want you to kill it. Your species has a reputation for solving problems that others cannot. The Terran Federation speaks of human adaptability and creativity. We are offering you anything you want: technology, resources, territory, if you can destroy the void." "Stalker." Morrison looked at his crew. Stone was already calculating attack strategies in his head. Grant was studying the biological data with scientific curiosity. Rodriguez was monitoring communications traffic to understand the full scope of the crisis. "We will need to study this creature firsthand," Morrison said finally. "Our ship will accompany you back to Zalara Prime. We cannot promise success, but we can promise to try." For the first time since boarding the Aurora Dawn, Vexhai smiled. "Captain, you have given my people something we have not had in generations: hope." Zalara Prime looked like a world made of crystal and light when the Aurora Dawn entered orbit. The planet's surface sparkled with cities that floated above ground on anti-gravity platforms, connected by bridges that seemed to be made of solid rainbows. Dr. Lisa Grant pressed her face to the observation window as they descended toward the landing coordinates. "It's beautiful," she whispered, watching the crystal forest sway in the alien wind. Captain Jake Morrison stood beside her, but his eyes were focused on the dark patches scattered across the continents. "Those dead zones," he said, pointing to areas where the crystal formations had turned black and twisted. "That's where the creature has been hunting." High Counselor Vexhai joined them at the window. "The Void Stalker's presence corrupts the very ground it walks on. Our crystal trees die, our floating cities fall from the sky, and nothing grows in those places for decades." The Aurora Dawn landed at a military base on the edge of the largest dead zone. Commander Rick Stone led the away team, carrying equipment that made the Zalani soldiers stare in confusion. Instead of energy weapons and force shields, the humans brought rope nets, crossbows, and metal containers filled with various powders and chemicals. "Captain Morrison," said General Kethver, the Zalani military commander, "are you certain these primitive tools will be effective against the Void Stalker?" Stone adjusted his equipment pack and smiled. "General, sometimes the old ways work better than the new ones. We've studied your reports, and this creature has learned to counter all your advanced technology. It won't expect something as simple as a net." The team moved into the dead zone on foot. The ground beneath their boots was cracked and black, covered with a substance that looked like dried blood but smelled like burning metal. The crystal trees that had once grown here were now twisted sculptures of glass and shadow, their branches reaching toward the sky like desperate fingers. "Lieutenant," Amy Rodriguez carried a device that monitored electromagnetic frequencies. "The creature uses some kind of energy field to phase through solid matter," she explained to the Zalani guide who walked beside her. "If we can disrupt that field, it becomes solid again." Dr. Grant knelt beside a pool of the acidic substance they had found at several kill sites. "This saliva is incredibly corrosive, but it follows basic chemical rules. We can neutralize it with the right compounds." She opened one of her containers and sprinkled a white powder into the acid. The liquid immediately began to bubble and turn clear. They walked for 3 hours through the wasteland before Rodriguez's equipment began to beep rapidly. "Contact?" she whispered into her radio. "The creature is within 1 kilometer of our position." The Zalani soldiers immediately raised their weapons, but Stone held up his hand. "No energy signatures," he ordered. "We need to draw it in close, before it realizes we're different from its usual prey." The attack came without warning. One moment they were walking through the twisted remains of a Zalani settlement, and the next moment the Void Stalker was simply there, rising from the ground. Like smoke given form. It was even more terrifying than the reports had described. The creature stood 12 feet tall on legs that seemed to bend in impossible directions. Its skin was darker than space itself, and its eyes burned with a cold fire that made the humans feel fear deep in their bones. When it opened its mouth, rows of teeth glinted like broken glass, and acidic saliva dripped onto the ground with a hissing sound. "Now," Stone commanded. The human team moved like they had trained together for years. Rodriguez activated a device that sent out a pulse of electromagnetic energy. The Void Stalker stumbled as its phasing ability suddenly failed, and for the first time in centuries, it was completely solid. Grant threw her chemical compounds at the creature's feet. The powders exploded in clouds of smoke that neutralized the acid pouring from its mouth. The Void Stalker roared in confusion as its most dangerous weapon became harmless. Stone and two other soldiers fired their crossbows simultaneously. The bolts were tipped with metal that conducted electricity, and they carried nets made from materials that the creature had never encountered before. The nets wrapped around the Void Stalker's legs and arms, holding it in place. The creature thrashed and fought with incredible strength, but the more it struggled, the tighter the nets became. Morrison stepped forward with a device that looked like a simple metal rod. When he touched it to the creature's skin, electricity surged through. The nets and the Void Stalker collapsed. The entire battle lasted less than 30 minutes. The creature that had terrorized an entire civilization for centuries lay motionless on the ground, defeated by weapons that seemed primitive compared to Zilani technology. The Zilani soldiers stood in stunned silence. General Kethver approached. The fallen creature with his weapon still raised, as if he expected it to jump up and attack again. "Is it dead?" he asked. Dr. Grant knelt beside the Void Stalker and checked for vital signs. "No, just unconscious. The electrical shock disrupted its nervous system, but it should recover in a few hours." "Then we must destroy it immediately," Vexhai said, his voice filled with panic, "before it wakes up and escapes." Captain Morrison looked at his crew and then at the alien leaders. "Actually, we have a different plan. We're going to take it back to our ship." "Are you insane?" General Kethver shouted. "That thing has killed millions of my people. It cannot be contained." "It can be contained," Stone said confidently. "And more importantly, it can be studied. Dr. Grant needs to understand its biology before we make any permanent decisions." The Zilani watched in horror as the humans carefully loaded the unconscious Void Stalker onto a transport platform. The creature that had haunted their nightmares for generations was being carried away like a piece of cargo. "What are you planning to do with it?" Vexhai asked. Morrison smiled in a way that made the alien leader feel uncomfortable. "We're going to figure out what makes it tick, and then we're going to decide if it's more useful to us alive or dead." The Void Stalker hung suspended in the Aurora Dawn's cargo bay, wrapped in layers of electrical netting that kept it unconscious. High Counselor Vexhai stood at the observation window, his hands shaking as he watched the creature that had terrorized his people for centuries. "You should destroy it now while it cannot fight back," he said to Captain Morrison, who stood beside him. "Every moment it remains alive is a moment it could escape and kill again." Morrison nodded but did not move toward the weapon controls. "Dr. Grant needs time to study it first. We need to understand what we're dealing with before we make any permanent decisions." In the cargo bay below, Dr. Lisa Grant worked with scientific precision around the sleeping monster. She took measurements of its limbs, collected samples of its saliva, and scanned its internal structure with portable equipment. The creature's body was unlike anything in human or Zilani databases. "Fascinating," she muttered as she examined the readings. "Its muscle structure is completely different from anything we've seen. The fibers are arranged in a way that should be impossible, but somehow they work together to create incredible strength." Commander Rick Stone watched her work from a safe distance, his hand never leaving his weapon. "Doc, this thing gives me the creeps even when it's knocked out." "What are you planning to do with all that data?" "I'm trying to understand how it survived for so long," Grant replied, taking another sample. "According to Zilani records, this creature has been alive for at least 500 years. It doesn't age, it doesn't get sick, and it heals from any wound within hours." Stone shook his head. "Sounds like the perfect killing machine?" "Maybe," Grant said, "but every biological system has weaknesses. I just need to find them." The creature began to stir after 6 hours of unconsciousness. Its eyes opened slowly, revealing the cold fire that had terrified the Zilani for generations. When it saw the humans surrounding it, the Void Stalker let out a roar that shook the metal walls of the cargo bay. "Increase the electrical current," Stone ordered. "Keep it down." The creature thrashed against the nets, but the electricity kept its nervous system disrupted. It could not use its phasing ability while the current flowed through its body, and the nets were made from materials that even its claws could not cut. High Counselor Vexai stepped away from the window. "I cannot watch this." "Please, Captain." "Morrison, end its suffering and destroy it." "Actually," came a voice from behind them, "I was hoping we could discuss other options." They turned to see Chef Petty Officer Carlos Martinez walking toward them with a datapad in his hands. The ship's cook rarely left his kitchen, and his presence in the cargo bay area surprised everyone. "Martinez, what are you doing here?" Morrison asked. "Well, sir, I've been reading Dr. Grant's preliminary reports, and I have some questions about the creature's biology." He held up his datapad, which showed detailed scans of the Void Stalker's muscle structure. According to these readings, the meat should be lean but well marbled, with a unique protein structure that might be very nutritious. The silence that followed was so complete that they could hear the electrical humming of the nets in the cargo bay below. "I'm sorry," Vexai said slowly, "but did you just refer to the Void Stalker as meat?" Martinez nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, sir. I've been studying the composition analysis, and this creature has one of the most interesting protein structures I've ever seen. The muscle fibers are arranged in a way that should make the meat incredibly tender, and these crystalline inclusions might give it a unique flavor. You want to eat it?" Vexai's voice rose to a pitch that hurt human ears. "Well, not immediately," Martinez said. "I'd need to run some tests first to make sure it's safe for human consumption. But yes, eventually I think this could make an excellent meal." Dr. Grant looked up from her work in the cargo bay. "Actually, that's not as crazy as it sounds. I've been analyzing the creature's biology, and it has several compounds that might be beneficial to human health. The regenerative properties alone could be revolutionary." High Counselor Vexai stared at the humans as if they had lost their minds. "This creature has killed millions of my people. It is the source of nightmares that have haunted our species. For centuries, and you want to cook it for dinner?" Captain Morrison crossed his arms and considered the situation. "Martinez, how confident are you that the meat would be safe to eat? Give me 12 hours to run proper tests and I can give you a definitive answer. Dr. Grant's scans show no obvious toxins, and the protein structure looks stable. I've prepared stranger things during my years in the Colonial Navy." "This is madness," Vexai said, pacing back and forth. "The Void Stalker is not food, it is death itself. It is the thing that parents tell their children about to make them behave. It is the monster that lives in every Zilani's worst dreams. On Earth," Stone said quietly, "we have a saying. The best way to conquer your fears is to face them head on. For humans, that often means finding ways to make our enemies useful." "You cannot be serious about this," Vexai pleaded. "Please tell me you are not actually planning to eat our apex predator." Morrison looked at his crew. Martinez was already making notes about preparation methods. Grant was collecting samples that could be used for safety testing. Stone was calculating how many people the creature could feed. "Counselor," Morrison said finally, "humans have been eating our apex predators for thousands of years. Bears, wolves, sharks, alligators. If it was dangerous enough to hunt us, we probably figured out how to cook it. It's just what we do." The Zilani leader sat down heavily in the nearest chair. "Your species terrifies me more than the Void Stalker ever did. That's probably wise," Grant said from the cargo bay. "But don't worry, we'll make sure there's enough for everyone. After all, you've been dealing with this thing longer than anyone. You deserve the first taste." High Counselor Vexhide buried his face in his hands and wondered what kind of beings he had asked for help. The humans had defeated their greatest enemy in less than an hour, and now they were planning to serve it for dinner. He began to suspect that the galaxy was about to learn something very important about human nature. The Aurora Dawn's mess hall had been transformed into something that looked like a combination of laboratory and restaurant. Chef Carlos Martinez worked alongside Dr. Lisa Grant, testing every aspect of the Voidstalker's biology to ensure it was safe for consumption. The creature's body lay on a specially designed table, its dark skin gleaming under the bright lights. "The protein structure is incredible," Grant said, examining a sample under her microscope. "Look at these muscle fibers. They're arranged in a way that should make the meat incredibly tender, but also packed with nutrients we've never seen before." Martinez nodded as he studied the creature's anatomy. "I've been comparing it to Earth animals, and it's most similar to alligator meat, but with these crystalline formations running through it. Those might give it a unique texture and flavor." High Counselor Vexhai stood at the far end of the room, unable to bring himself closer to the scene. Several other Zilani officials had joined him, all watching the humans work with expressions of horror and fascination. "They are treating it like livestock," whispered General Kethver. "The thing that has haunted our people for centuries, and they are discussing seasoning options." "I heard one of them mention marinade," added Science Minister Veltar. "What is marinade?" Captain Jake Morrison entered the mess hall carrying a bottle of wine and several containers of spices from Earth. "How are we progressing, Martinez?" "Very well, sir. Dr. Grant has confirmed that the meat is safe for human consumption, and I've identified the best cuts for different cooking methods. The creature's regenerative properties seem to be concentrated in specific organs, which might have medicinal value." Morrison set the wine on the counter. "And the taste?" "I ran a small sample through the food processor," Martinez said, holding up a small piece of cooked meat. "It's unlike anything I've ever prepared. The flavor is complex, almost sweet, with a texture that changes as you chew it." Commander Rick Stone joined them, carrying what looked like a small piece of the creature's hide. "Dr. Grant, this skin is tougher than any armor we've developed. Are you sure the meat inside is edible?" The hide is incredibly tough," Grant replied. "But the meat underneath is completely different. It's like the creature evolved to be both indestructible on the outside and nutritious on the inside." Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez entered with a datapad full of information. "I've been researching human culinary history, and we have a long tradition of eating our most dangerous predators. Bears, sharks, venomous snakes. If it could kill us, we found a way to cook it." "Why?" asked Vexhai, finally approaching the group. "Why do humans eat the things that frighten them?" Morrison considered the question carefully. "It's about transformation, Counselor. When we eat something that once threatened us, we take its power and make it part of ourselves. It's both practical and symbolic." "On Earth," Stone added, "some of our most expensive and prized foods are things that were once considered deadly. Poisonous fish, venomous snakes, massive predators. We learned to prepare them safely and they became delicacies." Martinez began preparing the first course, working with the precision of someone who had cooked for military crews in dangerous situations. "The regenerative compounds in the creature's organs are water-soluble, so I'm making a broth that should retain their beneficial properties?" "Beneficial properties?" General Kethver asked. Dr. Grant looked up from her samples. "The compounds in the Voidstalker's body appear to have healing properties that could extend lifespans and improve immune systems." "What your people feared. As a killer might actually be a source of enhanced health." "That's impossible," Science Minister Veltar said. "The creature is death itself. It cannot possibly be beneficial." "Death and life are often connected in ways we don't expect," Morrison replied. "The same creature that took life from your people might now be able to give enhanced life back to them." Martinez had begun working on the main course, carefully, preparing steaks from the creature's primary muscle groups. The meat had a slight luminescence that made it glow softly under the lights. The bioluminescent properties seemed to be tied to the creature's energy metabolism. "It should be safe to eat, and it might even be nutritious. How do you know all this?" Vexhai asked. "How can you be so confident about eating something that has never been eaten before?" "Because we've done it thousands of times," Rodriguez said, reading from her datapad. "Humans have been eating unknown and dangerous foods for our entire history. It's how we learn to survive in new environments. Every time humans encountered a new predator, Stone explained, we asked two questions: can we kill it and can we eat it? Usually the answer to both was yes. The smell of cooking meat began to fill the room. It was unlike anything the Zilani had ever experienced, rich and complex, with hints of sweetness and something that reminded them of their own crystal fruits. The aroma is remarkable, Martinez said, basting the steaks with a sauce he had created from the creature's own juices. I've never worked with anything quite like this. Vexai found himself stepping closer despite his fear. It smells good. That's the point, Morrison said. Food should be appealing. Even food that once tried to kill you. Dr. Grant held up a vial of clear liquid. I've extracted the healing compounds and concentrated them. A small amount of this in the broth should provide significant health benefits without any side effects. You're telling me, General Kethver said slowly, that the creature which has terrorized my people for centuries might actually make us healthier? Stronger, healthier, and longer lived, Grant confirmed. The irony is incredible. The thing you feared most might be exactly what you needed most. Martinez stepped back from his work, wiping his hands on his apron. Dinner will be ready in 2 hours. I've prepared a 7-course meal that showcases different aspects of the creature's biology. Each course will highlight different flavors. And textures. 7 courses? Vexai asked weakly. It's a big creature, Martinez replied with a smile. And besides, this is a historic moment. The first time anyone has eaten a Void Stalker deserves a proper celebration. The Zilani officials looked at each other with expressions of disbelief. Their greatest enemy was being transformed into a feast, and the humans were treating it like a holiday. The mess hall of the Aurora Dawn had been decorated with lights that matched the soft glow coming from the prepared Void Stalker dishes. Captain Jake Morrison stood at the head of the long table, looking at the faces of his crew and their Zilani. Guests, High Counselor Vexai sat to his right, his hands trembling slightly as he stared at the plates before him. Before we begin, Morrison said, raising a glass of water, I want to say something about what we're doing here tonight. For centuries, this creature has been a source of fear and death for the Zilani people. Tonight we transform that fear into nourishment and that death into life. Chef Carlos Martinez emerged from the kitchen carrying the first course. The soup glowed with a soft blue light that pulsed gently like a heartbeat. This is a broth made from the creature's bone marrow, he announced. Dr. Grant has confirmed. It contains the highest concentration of the healing compounds. The Zilani officials stared at their bowls as if they expected the soup to attack them. General Kethver picked up his spoon with the same caution he would use to handle an explosive device. I cannot do this, Science Minister Valtar whispered. This creature killed my brother 40 years ago. How can I eat it? Dr. Lisa Grant leaned forward from her seat. Minister, think of it this way. Every bite you take is revenge for your brother. You're literally consuming the thing that took him from you. Captain Morrison lifted his spoon and took the first taste. The broth was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was rich and warming, with a flavor that seemed to change as he swallowed it. More importantly, he could feel a slight tingling sensation that suggested the healing compounds were already working. It's remarkable, he said, taking another spoonful. Martinez, you've outdone yourself. High Counselor Vexai watched Morrison eat without any ill effects. Slowly, carefully, he lifted his own spoon and tasted the smallest possible amount. His eyes widened in surprise. It tastes like hope, he whispered. One by one, the other Zilani began to try the soup. General Kethver was next, followed by Science Minister Veltar. Each of them had the same reaction: surprise, then wonder, then something that looked like relief. How is this possible? Veltar asked. How can something so evil taste so good? Commander Rick Stone smiled from across the table. That's the thing about humans. We don't see anything as purely evil if it can be made useful. Even our worst enemies usually have something valuable about them. Martinez returned with the second course, thin slices of the creature's muscle tissue that had been prepared like sashimi. The meat glowed softly and seemed to shift colors as they watched it. This is the creature's primary locomotion muscle, he explained. It's what gave it the ability to move so quickly and silently. The texture should be very tender. Lieutenant. Amy Rodriguez took the first bite of this course. It's incredible. The texture changes as you chew it, and the flavor gets more complex. Dr. Grant nodded as she ate. The muscle fibers are breaking down in our mouths, releasing different compounds in stages. It's like eating a puzzle that solves itself. The Zilani were becoming more comfortable with each course. High Counselor Vexhai had stopped trembling and was actually asking questions about the preparation methods. How did you know to cook it this way? Experience, Morrison replied. Humans have been preparing dangerous foods for thousands of years. We've learned that the key is understanding the biology and working with it instead of against it. The third course was a steak cut from the creature's core muscles. Grilled to perfection and seasoned with spices from Earth, the meat was perfectly tender, and the crystalline structures within it created tiny bursts of flavor with each bite. This is extraordinary, General Kethfer said, cutting another piece. I feel stronger already. Is that possible? The healing compounds work quickly, Grant explained. Your cellular regeneration should be noticeably improved within hours of eating this. As the meal progressed, something remarkable began to happen. The Zilani officials started to relax, then to smile, and finally to laugh. Science Minister Veltar told a story about his childhood fears of the Void Stalker, but now he was laughing about it instead of crying. You know what the strangest part is? He said, taking another bite. I'm not afraid anymore. For the first time in my life, when I think about the Void Stalker, I don't feel terror. I feel hungry. The humans laughed at this, and soon the entire table was filled with the sound of genuine joy. Martinez brought out course after course, each one showcasing a different aspect of the creature's biology. There was a salad made from organs that had stored energy, a pasta dish using proteins from the creature's defensive systems, and even a dessert that incorporated the bioluminescent properties. How many creatures like this are left on Zalara Prime? Morrison asked during the main course. Our last count showed perhaps a dozen, Vexhai replied. They are scattered across the northern continents, each one terrorizing a different region. Stone set down his fork. We'll help you hunt them all. But next time, we're going to teach your people how to do it themselves. And how to cook them properly, Martinez added. This could become a new tradition for your people. Instead of fearing your apex predator, you can look forward to dinner. Dr. Grant raised her glass. To transformation. To turning our greatest fears into our greatest strengths. The toast was echoed around the table in both human and Zilani languages. As they ate, the Zilani officials shared stories of the terror the creatures had caused. But now those stories had a different meaning. Each tale of death and destruction was balanced by the knowledge that the source of that terror was now providing them with strength and healing. I have a confession, Vexhai said as they finished the final course. When I first contacted your ship, I hoped you would kill the Void Stalker quickly and be done with it. I never imagined anything like this. Morrison smiled. That's the difference between humans and most other species, Counselor. We don't just solve problems. We transform them into opportunities. As the evening ended, the Zilani officials looked like different people than they had been when they arrived. They stood straighter, their eyes were brighter, and most importantly, they were no longer afraid. The creature that had haunted their nightmares for centuries had become the source of the best meal of their lives. 3 months had passed since the Aurora Dawn first arrived at Zalara Prime, and Captain Jake Morrison could hardly believe the transformation he saw as their ship approached the planet for a second time. The dock zones that had once marked areas of Voidstalker activity were now bustling with construction crews rebuilding cities and replanting crystal forests. Look at that, Dr. Lisa Grant said, pointing to the main screen where they could see floating platforms carrying what looked like restaurant equipment. They're building dining establishments in the old dead zones. Commander Rick Stone laughed as he watched the activity below. I never thought I'd see the day when an entire species would turn their apex predator into a food industry. The Aurora Dawn docked at the same military base where they had first met General Kethver, but the atmosphere was completely different now. Instead of scared soldiers preparing for hopeless battles, they saw confident hunters organizing expeditions with equipment that looked remarkably similar to what the humans had used. High Counselor Vexai met them at the landing bay, but he was not the same broken leader who had begged for help months earlier. He stood taller, his skin had a healthier glow, and most importantly, he was smiling. "Captain Morrison," he said, embracing the human in a gesture that would have been unthinkable during their first meeting. "Welcome back to Zalara Prime. We have so much to show you." As they walked through the base, Morrison noticed that the Zilani soldiers were carrying crossbows and nets instead of energy weapons. Their equipment looked primitive by galactic standards, but he knew from experience that it was perfectly designed for hunting void stalkers. "How many have you captured since we left?" Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez asked. 11, General Kethver replied proudly. "We have learned your techniques well. The creatures cannot adapt to methods they have never encountered before." Dr. Grant was amazed by the changes she saw in the Zilani people. "Your health improvements are remarkable. The cellular regeneration is even better than my projections suggested. The healing compounds in the creature's flesh have extended our lifespans by an estimated 30%, Science Minister Veltar explained. But more than that, we are no longer a people living in fear. We have become hunters instead of prey." They were taken to the largest city on the planet, where the most dramatic changes were visible. In the center of the main plaza stood a statue that made the humans stop and stare. It was a perfect replica of a void stalker, but instead of being portrayed as a monster, it was shown as a provider. Zilani families were depicted gathering around it, receiving nourishment and strength. "We call it the Transformation Monument," Vexai explained. "It reminds us that even our greatest fears can become our greatest blessings if we have the courage to change our perspective." The plaza was filled with the smell of cooking food, and Morrison realized that several restaurants had been built around the monument. Each one specialized in different preparations of void stalker meat, and all of them were crowded with customers. "Liberation Cuisine," Rodriguez said, reading one of the restaurant signs. "That's a perfect name for it." Chef Carlos Martinez was practically bouncing with excitement as he examined the menus. "They've developed cooking techniques I never would have thought of. Look at this, void stalker tartare with crystalline seasoning, braised leg with healing, broth reduction, and something called courage steaks that are supposed to make you brave." "Do they actually make you brave?" Stone asked. "The psychological effect is real," Grant replied. "When you eat something that once terrified you, it creates a profound shift in your mental state. The physical healing compounds probably help, too." They visited one of the restaurants, where the Zilani chef proudly showed them techniques that combined human hunting methods with traditional Zilani cooking. The meals were even more elaborate than what Martinez had prepared on the ship, with artistic presentations that turned each dish into a work of art. "The most popular item," the chef explained, "is something we call the Conqueror's Feast. It includes parts from all of the creature's major organs, prepared in 7 different styles. Families come here to celebrate when their children overcome their first major fear." "You've turned it into a cultural tradition," Morrison observed. "More than that," Vexai said. "We have turned it into a philosophy. The humans taught us that nothing should be feared if it can be understood and used. Now we apply that thinking to everything in our lives." As they explored the city, they discovered that the changes went far beyond food. The Zilani had developed new technologies based on studying the void stalker's biology. They had created better armor using principles learned from the creature's hide, improved their medical treatments using the healing compounds, and even developed new construction techniques inspired by the creature's ability to phase through matter. "We have sent expeditions to other worlds," General Kethver told them. "There are rumors of similar creatures on distant planets, and we want to help other species learn what we have learned." "From victims to teachers," Rodriguez said. Admiringly, "That's quite a transformation." The visit concluded with a formal ceremony in the government building. High Counselor Vex High presented Captain Morrison with the Crystal of Courage, The highest honor in Zelani culture, but he had modified it with a small pendant made from a void stalker's claw. This represents the transformation you taught us. He said, "You showed us that even the darkest fear can become light if we have the wisdom to change how we see it." Dr. Grant received a similar honor for her scientific contributions, and the entire crew was granted permanent citizenship on Zalara Prime. Chef Martinez was offered a position running the planet's new culinary institute, where he would teach both humans and Zelani the art of preparing dangerous foods safely. As the Aurora Dawn prepared to leave for their next mission, Morrison stood on the bridge looking down at the transformed world below. The Zelani had not just overcome their apex predator, they had turned the entire experience into a source of strength and growth. "Captain," Rodriguez said from her communications station, "we're receiving a transmission from Starfleet Command. There's a species called the Vorthan requesting help with something they call an immortal death beast that has been terrorizing their colonies." Stone grinned as he checked his equipment. "Sounds like another dinner invitation to me." Morrison smiled as he gave the order to change course. "Set a course for Vorthan space. And Rodriguez, send them a message. Tell them we're bringing our chef. Somewhere in the galaxy, there was probably a creature that saw humans as their apex predator." Morrison thought about that as the Aurora Dawn jumped to hyperspace. He hoped it was delicious.